You will hear a talk on seasonal affective disorder.
Listen carefully to the first part of the conversation and answer questions 1.
In the past few years, a new condition has been identified and given a name: SAD, short for Seasonal Affective Disorder. This is now recognized as a distinct kind of clinical depression, where people become depressed at the onset of winter, accompanied by a craving for sweet things, causing weight gain. Each spring and summer would then bring on almost maniacal highs and feelings of boundless energy and happiness. Experiments to combat this depression showed that increased exposure to bright light in humans could suppress their production of a darkness-related hormone called melatonin. The light needed to induce this change was about 2,000 lux, or about 4 times brighter than ordinary household lighting. It was then calculated that if bright light could suppress melatonin secretion, then it might have other effects on the brain, including the reversal of symptoms of depression. While melatonin's precise role in SAD has not been pinned down, the theory led to effective treatment. Not surprisingly, SAD affects more people where winter nights are longer and days shorter. In the UK, an estimated 500,000 adults develop full-blown SAD in winter, and twice this number suffer the milder condition called subsyndromal SAD. About 80% of sufferers improve when given light therapy, and improvement usually comes within 2 to 4 days. Scientists are still unsure why winter depression happens, but more than a decade of research has turned up some surprising findings. Nearly 80% of SAD victims are women. Researchers are uncertain why this is so. SAD can affect people at any age, but typically it begins around the age of 20 and becomes less common between 40 and 50. SAD is comparatively rare in children and adolescents, but so far researchers have been unable to come up with a logical reason for this. As many as half of SAD sufferers have at least one family member with depressive illness, suggesting that the depression has a genetic component. Some patients experience shifts in their body clocks when they're depressed in winter. They are morning people at one time of the year and become evening people at another. What is the underlying difference between SAD sufferers and others? A clue can be found in carbohydrate craving, a common symptom. People often become obsessed with chocolate, for example. Carbohydrates alter brain chemistry by increasing the level of a soothing chemical called serotonin, a neurotransmitter that carries signals between brain cells. SAD sufferers crave carbohydrates because they may need serotonin to lift their mood. This craving can be intense, in fact, an addiction. It may be that the serotonin system of the brain has problems regulating itself during the winter. Some SAD sufferers respond well to the drug Prozac, thought to influence the brain's serotonin-using system. Other brain chemicals and hormones probably play a role in winter depression. Another neurotransmitter, dopamine, for example, may be inadequate in certain cases. Researchers hope to uncover clues to SAD's secret by probing similarities between SAD and hibernation. Though no valid link between the two has been established, some SAD patients say they feel like hibernating animals. SAD sufferers tend to put on fat in autumn and early winter, roughly the time when such hibernators as bears and squirrels do.
That is the end of part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Section 2.
You will hear part of an advertising lecture.
First, you have some time to look at questions.
Let's look now at a famous example. In 1925, Alan Odell, who owned a small company that made a brushless shaving cream, noticed that gas stations and other local businesses were increasing trade by putting up advertising signs along the nation's highways. He decided that he could increase his sales by putting up sets of signs, 5 in a set. They would not have to be big, and a short line on each one would do. At first, Odell tried the hard sell approach. Sales began to increase at once, but that did not satisfy him. Motorists see these signs, he told himself, at remote places on the highway. Perhaps after hours of monotonous driving, they would appreciate a touch of rhyme and humour. They would indeed. It was not long before the catchy Burma shave signs, some ironic, some cynical, some absurd, but all of them funny, caught the fancy of nearly everyone, including those people usually critical of advertising. These signs continued as the advertising medium of the company for 35 years, and then, when cars travelled too fast to take in these messages, more than a dozen words painted in rather small letters, the company phased out its roadside advertising. Perhaps a growing criticism of this sort of advertising, which interfered with highway scenery, also influenced the company's decision. By late 1965, this criticism resulted in President Lyndon Johnson's Highway Beautification Bill. This bill authorised a federal-state campaign to improve the scenery on either side of major highways, to conceal or remove junkyards, and to put billboards sufficiently far back from the highway so that they would not interfere with the view. States that did not comply with the bill could lose 10% of their federal highway grant. But this was not the end of the billboard industry. Many roads were not part of the highway system, which was supported by federal grants, and these roads were not affected by the law, and nor were signs in commercial and industrial areas.
The other method you're going to practice this week is the bamboo oven. Now, the steam pit is ideal in certain conditions because the heat is below ground level. For example, if there's a strong wind and you're afraid a fire might spread. But when it's safe to have an open fire, you can use the bamboo oven method. You get a length of bamboo, which, as you probably know, is hollow and consists of a number of individual sections with a wall in between. You use a sharp stick to make a hole in each of the dividing walls apart from the end one. Then you lean the bamboo over a fire, with the top propped up by a forked stick and the bottom sitting on the ground. You pour enough water in the top to fill the bottom section, and then light a fire underneath that section to heat the water. Then you put your food inside the top section, and the steam coming up the bamboo through the holes you made cooks it. I'm going to move on now to food itself and talk about some of the wild plants you might cook. I'm going to begin with fungi. That's mushrooms and toadstools. I'm sure you'll be aware that some of these are edible and they're delicious, but some of them are highly poisonous. Now, whether they're poisonous or not, all fungi that you find in the wild should be cooked before eating, because that helps to destroy any compounds in them that might be mildly toxic. But be aware that any amount of cooking won't make poisonous varieties any safer to eat. Unless you can definitely identify a fungus, you should never eat it. It's not worth the risk. And you need to be really sure, because some fungi that are poisonous are very similar in appearance to certain edible varieties. They can easily be mistaken for each other. So, having said all that, fungi are delicious when they're freshly picked, And although they are only moderately nutritious, they do contain minerals which the body needs. I'll move on now.
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.